all my rockstar teachers. I'm Pam from Rock and Resources, and I wanted to talk to you about differentiating in the classroom. I have a few other videos on my YouTube that were Facebook Lives that I had on my Facebook page as well that talk about differentiating, and I wanted to continue on and share some more information with you. Also, I have some blog posts for differentiating. If you go to rockandresources.com, on the blog section, there's a category and it says differentiating, and there's several blog posts on there as well. So a lot of the things I'm going to talk about today are on some of these blog posts, but I wanted to give you an overall feel of what I wanted to get across. So with that being said, I want to start off by talking to you about things that may happen if you don't differentiate, because I know that, it could be very scary, and that there's a lot to do in planning for differentiating. But once you really get to know your students and know what makes them tick and what really helps them in the classroom, then it'll all fall together, and it's not as scary as you really think. First of all, one thing that teachers think often is that you have to differentiate for every student in your classroom. Well, yes, you want to meet their needs, but you can cluster them together. So you don't have to have 25 different ways of differentiating. If this group of children are on a certain level, if you're grouping by levels, or if you're grouping by learning styles, which I talk about in another one of my videos about the different learning styles and levels. You can group them that way, and then that way it's not as difficult in your planning. And once you get to know the groups and know your students, it'll be so much easier for you, and you can go through and be able to do any kind of lesson according to what they need. So that is one thing I wanted to share with you. But let's talk about what happens when you don't differentiate. And I have my computer sitting over here so I don't forget some of the things I want to say. I just have some of my blogs pulled up, and that way I can go through some of these things. Because I can think and think and think of all these things I want to share with you, and then I get behind the video and I'm like, I forget everything I want to say. So one of the pitfalls of not differentiating in your classroom is you will have the lack of motivation and engagement. If the students are not learning on their level or with their learning style, and it's uncomfortable for them or difficult for them or not challenging enough for them, then you're going to lose them. You're going to lose their motivation, their engagement, and they're not going to have that deeper learning, that deeper comprehension of whatever you are trying to get across. And that's really what you want to target with differentiating, is to get them motivated and have them excited about learning. And sometimes they don't even realize that they are learning because they're so engaged in what they're doing. The second thing I want to talk about is gaps and cracks. So we've all heard that phrase of slipping through the cracks, and we never want anyone to say that teacher, hello, my child was slipping through the cracks in her classroom. You never want that to happen, or you never want to feel that happening. So when you don't differentiate, that there's a high possibility, not always, but a high possibility that some students will slip through the cracks. One of the things that goes along with that, I want to talk briefly about assessment-driven instruction. And I know all the testing is crazy. That is absolutely insane, and that's one thing I could totally go off on a tangent with. But if you do little things to go along the way for assessment, just doing a quick what do you know, or what are you struggling with, or quick little assessment on anything content related, so you know where your students are. It could even be raise of hands, or send me a note, or it could be very simple. It doesn't always have to be formal assessments. Now I do like to do, especially in language arts, I like to do a formal assessment at the beginning of the year, just so that I know how to group them, what is helping them. And I love surveys, y'all. I love surveys. Excuse me. I like to give my students surveys on how they're feeling, what's hard for them, what do they like, they can even tell you what their learning style is just through a survey, and that makes it so much easier for you. Yes, I talk with my hands. I just noticed I have a bunch of paint on my nails because I was trying to whitewash a frame, which didn't turn out so well, so I'm going to redo it. But anyway, that's what that is. Okay, so pitfall number 3 is students not enriched. Okay, so first of all, the last one I talked about the gaps and the cracks, and that could be the kids who might be reluctant writers or struggling readers or whatever, and they could fall through the cracks. But then there's that opposite end of students not being enriched. So if you have students that are reading on a higher level or writing multiple paragraphs when the rest of your class is working on just forming one paragraph, then you definitely want to have something in place for those students, because they're just going to get bored, which is going to be my next thing I'm going to talk about. So they're, and you hate to hear that word, I know, but they need to be challenged and they need to be enriched in their education so that they can continue growing if they're above grade level. So that next thing I touched base on was being bored. So of course we hear that word, and as a teacher you're just like, I don't want to hear, my child is bored. That's horrible, I know, but it happens. It really, really does. And you can fight it, but it happens. And what I noticed along the way was whenever a student is bored, and it's not always the students that are above level, a lot of times it's the students below level as well, because yes, they're being challenged, but it might be so difficult for them, or they're not understanding it. They might not be learning, according to their learning style or level or whatever. And then the boredom sets in because they're just not getting it. And we all know, well, I'm saying from experience, is when the boredom sets in, that's when you might have some behavior issues. The students are looking for other ways to occupy their time, basically, because they're just not getting it, or it's too easy for them, one or the other. And we definitely don't want to have those disruptive behaviors in our classroom. Next pitfall is low self-esteem. And I see this way too often when students just lack that confidence. If they lack the confidence, they're not going to want to work for you. We can build up that confidence through differentiating. And one thing that I talk about a lot in one of the other videos is about choice, and how choice is so important it doesn't have to be for everything. And that's another thing I wanted to talk real quick is it doesn't have to be with every lesson you do. Absolutely not. But it should be incorporated throughout the day in some form, whether it's just for your reading class this week and just for your writing class next week. As long as you're mixing it in somehow so that all those different levels and different learning styles and different ways of learning, whatever, is being touched upon so that they enjoy learning, they like coming to your class, you're building up their self-esteem, and those surveys and choices and all that kind of stuff all helps with that. And you can have them starting to think positive about themselves. And of course you can, incorporate a lot of character education in there, which I talk about in another video, but that definitely, the low self-esteem. Then the last pitfall that I want to talk about is just that lack of rapport and trust. You want your students to trust you. You want to be able to communicate with them. And if they're not seeing that you're trying to reach them, then they're not going to try to reach out to you, if that makes any sense. And you want your students to trust you. You want them to know that you're trying everything that you can to make sure that they have the tools that they need for learning. So, what better way for your instruction to be successful and to really get the kids in some deep level learning and being successful throughout the year and reaching their full potential is through differentiating. And please don't get scared or nervous or don't even think that way, because in the long run, if you're doing proactive planning, then you don't have to be reactive at the end of the year when you're trying to scramble and figure out how to get them caught up in what they need to do. If you take that time, especially at the beginning of the year, like I talked about, trying to figure the student surveys and the assessments to try to figure out where they are and what they do, then the rest of the year will definitely go smoother for you. And I do talk about in another blog post several things. I talk about tracking, and I do a lot of student track, like the students do their tracking. So they can color code and do some graphs and see where they are. And that's a great way of getting them involved in their own learning. In another blog post, I talk about the different learning styles and the different levels and how to work with them. And then I also have a blog post and a video about strategies. So what you can do in your classroom in those groups. I hope you learned something here today, and I hope I see you at the next video. So you can go rock your teaching now.